Do you want to know what the fallen are, little one? In a sense, they are angels, but not the angels your mom imagines she prays to. Brass trumpets picnicking in the clouds. In their true essence, they are great swirling engines of wing and blood, fiery eyes that peer around the corners between worlds. Dark, radiant things conjured from fresh battlefields. A Frankenstein's Valkyrie, forever crashing to Midgard. What grief demands their hate? What vast cannibal hunger?
Welcome to the Fallen Cycle. This is a universe full of secrets, waiting for those brave or foolhardy enough to seek them out. Tales from When I Had a Face was written by James Curcio, with editing by Brian Johnson. A modern fairy tale about death, loss, and finding redemption in the strangest places, for those of us still haunted by the uncertain, occult logic of dreams. The soundtrack features the work of David Bessel, along with contributions from Jen E., P. Emerson Williams, and James Curcio, from the archives of past Mythos projects. Support for this project is pivotal. By becoming a patron at patreon.com/mythosmedia, that's MYTHOS media, you enable us to make more content like this, and to be able to hire on more freelance artists in future works. You can also discover more about the Mythpunk Fallen Cycle universe at fallencycle.com. This podcast contains adult themes and may induce psychosis. And now, this week's episode. Season 1, Episode 6, The Prince.
We followed Eluane along a path that wound wild through the outer city. The market of New Babylon was a beast that thrived on chaos. A living thing made of living things. Merchants with baskets full of spices and dried dates called out into the crowd. Strips of flesh turned slowly, sweating and smoking over black flames, heaps of coal and sparks dancing in the wind. Men slept in the doorways or peered from the shade, resting, prepared for flight at a moment's notice. Tiny monkeys scampered amongst the thick thighs of dancers, who giggled and grinned at one another, sharing some joke that I would never be privy to. Looking over her shoulder, Elena murmured, "Where are you taking us?" He didn't answer. Passers-by ignored him, or rather, they seemed to see just another stranger, avoiding eye contact and hurrying forward to wherever his day might carry him. With but a single mask, I watched the Raven Wanderer trick them into seeing a full range of expressions. Turn this way, and then that. He seemed to grin or frown, to look mournful or tired. It was only when I looked closely that I could see through the illusion. We turned another corner, and the narrow maze of blind alleys opened into a broad square, filled with a patchwork of tents of all sizes and colors. He approached a large domed tent placed in the center of the square, covered in a flowing script, the very characters themselves like the shoots, leaves, and petals of a morning glory. Lifting up the fabric that blocked the entrance, Eluane waved us in, beads clicking between his fingers like dry twigs. At first, we could see nothing but strange forms shifting in the firelight, but there was music. A circular rhythm reached for us from beyond the darkness and seemed to draw us forward. My eyes adjusted as Eluane led us on, the mask already dangling from his neck by a length of leather cord. We passed through a foyer, adorned with a banner of blue stars, and then into the vastness of the tent. Though mostly hidden in russet shadow, I could see sacks of grain, canisters of spices from far-off jungles, casks fashioned of northern copper, iron and steel, and the air smelled of these things, along with the musk of incense and sweat. Eluane strode ahead confidently with his arms extended before him, as if greeting a friend in some customary ceremony. Behind us, I spied 2 guards. They stared straight ahead without flinching or even seeming to breathe, bows slung over their shoulders and curved swords at their sides. Ahead were dancers, painted head to foot in zebra-like stripes of yellow and grape pigment. They swayed around a censer of Bakur. its liquid smoke pouring into the air in counterclockwise spirals, swirling between their bodies as they continued to pulse along in time with the hands and mouths of the musicians that lounged in the shadows behind them. In the center of the tent, two men sat on an array of embroidered pillows. One was a bull of a man with a spear balanced carefully on his lap. The other was shorter in stature and slighter of build. The smaller of the two rubbed his eyes theatrically and did a double take, though he sounded sincere in his surprise, and his smile seemed genuine as well, if a bit too practiced. "Eluane, is it really you?" Eluane stopped and seemed to imply a bow with the tilt of his head. "Prince Samah." The man returned the gesture, but with a full prostrate bow. "I heard you were lost forever with the rest of your people," he said. "I was captured. Now, here I stand," Eluane said. "So I see, and ageless as ever, I'm honored. It's been long since you've graced us with your wanderings. I was only a child then. Have you met Walaj, my Abdal?" Eluane closed the distance between them as Samah spoke, but we lingered behind. "Samah, please, we don't have time for the usual elaborate Imari greetings," he said, then eyed Samah warily. Samah sprung to his feet and clasped Eluane close. Samah whispered something into his ear, but we could not hear it. The guards seemed to visibly relax. Samah stood back, still clutching Eluane's hand. He smirked. "There is at least time for mavosh tea. Who are your friends?" "3 young girls. Procured at the temple, I assume." Eluane waved a hand at him dismissively. Samah continued to smile but crossed his arms. Eluane gestured for us to approach. He seemed to be humoring this man, and moreover wanted it known that he was. "The eldest is Ayta, then Elena, and Nyssa." "There is a story here, surely," Samah said. "Surely," said Eluane, leveling an even stare and saying nothing more. Walaj crushed an herb into an ornate metal pot. Steam already rose from it, sweet with cream tinged with citrus oils and a fainter scent like freshly cut grass. Samah reclined on the cushions again and motioned for us to join him. Walaj poured the mavosh into tiny metal cups which had evidently been crafted painstakingly by hand, and offered one to Samah. Then he gave another to each of us, a smile on his lips that did not radiate to his eyes. "It lightens the veil between worlds and words," Samah said mildly, motioning toward his tea as he blew on it. "Mind yourselves. That is, if you mind your tongue growing lighter," he added, now looking up at us with a laugh. Eluane took a cup between 2 fingers. "I must speak to your father. Elena has killed one of the 7. Samah pointed at Elena incredulously. "This harmless little creature?" She frowned and looked away. "Not so harmless," she murmured. He smiled disarmingly, but Eluane ignored their exchange and continued without hesitation. "For that alone we would need to flee this very night. But worse, I believe she may soon wake at last." "Soon, you say? After 1,000 seasons?" Samah sipped softly, lost in thought. Then he spoke, reciting scripture he seemed to only half recall. "The dead remain forever wandering twilight forests. In their forgetfulness do they know they knock their heads on the gates of immortality. Something, so the Feyin ensure the cycle is broken. She shall never awaken." "I don't remember the passage exactly," Samah admitted, "but that last part seems pretty important. The fallen cannot bedevil us here. Her ascension is blocked by the rituals your people taught all Oyun." "I wish it was so simple. Our practice is more art than science, and as you know, there are so few of us left," Eluane said. This had a startlingly sobering effect on Samah. He stroked his mustache to calm himself. "It is true, some still fear it. Driven mad by 1,000 years of our nightmares and desires, suddenly set loose upon this world. It sounds bad, I'll admit." Then he shook his head and gave Eluane a shrewd glance. "I honor you and your people, but let me be honest. I ask myself, What do I believe in your scriptures? Is it just poetry? Eluane did not seem concerned with this criticism. Let me interpret these poems for you then, as I am more familiar with them. I believe it began with the first humans arriving from beyond the wastes, those little ants traipsing across her bare skin. He blew on his tea and inhaled the steam deeply. I followed his lead. Over generations, this world was tamed by your presence, tamed and carved like a roast. Ore and crystal that the Chernayans ripped out of Neerithea, timber stolen from the Tovag Baragu. All these things will reach the backwards south too, even your distant city of gemstone and glass. Rostovan tastes the machinery of Sevgorod. It is a restless, a ceaseless hunger. Elena glared at him for speaking ill of her beloved homeland. No offense meant to the Rostovan traveling at my side, Eluane said, but it is the truth. Your very presence ignited her own desire for dominion, and she became that impulse writ large. Paths existed before, streams of people and animals trickling from the mountains, plains and forests of the north to the desert sands, jungle and marsh of the south. More minds, more dreams. She followed you here, a hitchhiker riding in every human mind, and found refuge, not merely a mortal avatar but the spirit itself, whereas most fallen slither back into their holes to regenerate and find a new host. She came here, instead. The stream of humanity has become a great river, an army of northerners grinding gashes in her flanks. Humans have shaped Alteran into something more like themselves, and so has she. We all know the Chernayan goal is a rail line all the way from Rostova to Orman, and New Babylon lies between them. She must have felt this too, as she shifted in slumber, sensed the changing of the seasons. It seemed that Eluane had forgotten that he was in a hurry. The music continued to pour over us, moving in syrupy waves that shimmered in pastel geometries. I found myself distracted, swaying in time with the much more talented dancers across the tent, and melted ever so subtly into the blankets beneath us. As you know, New Babylon has long depended on the harshness of the desert to offer sweetness to starving senses, Eluane said, concluding what I only then realized must have been a long discourse. Samah blinked thoughtfully and finished yet another cup. He nodded with enthusiasm after a few moments and reasoned, if what you say is true, then her sun is already setting. New Babylon will gradually fall by the wayside, a superstitious antiquity. You worry too much, my friend. To the contrary, I believe she finally seeks to leave her place in the darkness so that she might rise in the light, Eluane said. Samah chuckled and popped a date into his mouth, chewing contemplatively. Still citing scripture. This is a matter of prophecy and legend, not politics, he said. They are one, young prince. Politics, legend, and prophecy are one, replied Eluane. Samah rolled his eyes, but I could see that he weighed what had been said. I leaned back into the cushions and was lost to sensation. Elena looked at them with dawning concern, though her true thoughts were veiled. Samah's voice brought me back. You can't be considering help the Chernayans? Eluane rested a hand on his shoulder. I don't know what I'm considering yet. I only know we need to get out of here. Ashanti is the safest place for us south of the divide, but will you take us personally? It does not often go so well for the living when Feyan show up on the doorstep. My very appearance is often seen as an ill omen. But with you at our side... Samah smiled at him, and Eluane grinned in return. There seemed in his expression a hint of who he might have once been. A prince, blessed by fate, much as Samah was now. For a moment, he seemed as young as the flesh he wore. For a moment, he seemed like a person. Samah nodded, again suddenly grave. Very well, it is decided, but the windships don't leave until morning.
That's all for this week's episode. Stay up to date with upcoming episodes by subscribing at fallencycle.podbean.com or wherever you prefer to listen to your podcasts. Check out the work of the contributing musicians. Those links and additional information is available in the text provided along with this episode. This audio edition was produced by James Kershaw, along with text-to-speech synthesis. A statement on the use of LLMs is available on our website for those curious about how we do and don't use these technologies. This podcast is Creative Commons 3.0, attribution, share and share alike, non-commercial use.